Welcome to part two of Miss Mer's Language Analysis Revision Screencast. So we started looking at the article titled What We Wear is Really to Die For. And I'm going to continue on with the second column. So obviously we shift from this sort of appeal to logic and appeal to a sense of credibility or values to more kind of emotive turn of phrase here. So what she's done here is paint a picture of fashion as being all about illusion and vanity through her description of the fashion industry trading in illusion, selling dreams of a more alluring self. So this idea of a more alluring self is about vanity. Illusion is all about superficiality. So this idea that the fashion industry is quite shallow comes through here. The second part, if we properly examine the oppressive dumps where so much of it is made, might the whole house of cards tumble. She employs a cliche in the form of a metaphor, the house of cards, and the connotations obviously of an oppressive dump is quite dark in comparison to the illusion selling dreams of a more alluring self. So she makes this lovely contrast between the fashion industry and the illusion and the garment manufacturing industry and a sense of darkness and oppression. And also rubbish. This idea of dumps makes us think of rubbish dumps, makes us think of waste. And again, this is part of her argument in this article is that the waste around these really cheap clothing industries is not really addressed either. So this is it's quite a shift in tone here, where she really wants to shine a light on the hypocrisy of the fashion industry in the modern world. Okay, she comes back to a sort of logical, sort of linear, rational stance here by framing the whole issue in a local context. So because this newspaper is Australian, it has an Australian audience, you would imagine, therefore showing that Oxfam has named 4 Australian companies really brings the issue home for the readership as she puts a local spotlight on the issue. As we move down into this paragraph where she makes the assertion that the company's Facebook pages weren't exactly alive with the debate this week. What you should ask yourself here is what she would sound like saying this. I would argue that she sounds quite sarcastic. And this sarcasm, she uses sarcasm as evidence of something. What I would like you to do is have a think about what that might be. So the company's Facebook pages weren't exactly alive with debate this week. So this is the idea that Target, Big W, Kmart and Cotton On have been exposed as companies that make clothes in Bangladesh that Oxfam was sort of wanting to look into. And then she goes on to say that their Facebook pages, their social media network wasn't very busy in response. So what does this imply? What is she implying by saying this? She's implying something quite specific, and that is the inactivity in social media around this issue would suggest a lack of care. It would suggest that the public don't see this as something worth focusing on or spending their energy on. Then she very cleverly comes, if we come down to the bottom of that paragraph, when she says, but I couldn't help contrasting the muted response with the online frenzy last year over Target's raunchy kids' shorts. So the idea that there was an online frenzy caused over kids' shorts that were perhaps sexualising children compared to sort of dead social media presence in response to all of these children in Bangladesh dying really suggests something about the cultural framework of this issue. So she's looking at the fact that nobody cares about slave labour and young people, women, children dying in Bangladesh, and yet we're outraged at the thought of our children wearing shorts that are too grown up for them. If we move on to the third column on the first page, it's a bit blurry, but bear with me and you can refer to your reading. She comes back to an appeal to values. She wants us to think about what we value and why. She implores the audience to buy less of better quality and look after it. So obviously she's using inclusive language, which speaks to the fact that this is not something that she is not guilty of herself. She's sort of suggesting that she's part of this issue and we're all part of this issue. She's appealing to our sense of humanity, of understanding that we're sort of being consumed by this idea that more is better. This also sort of refers back to her point about oppressive dumps. So these places that are just making rubbish, consumer rubbish. And this again speaks to our sense of ethics, what we think is right and wrong. We shift back into a slightly more emotive appeal here, where she says this drive for ever cheaper clothes leads companies to scour the globe for suppliers who will cut costs and make things at breakneck speed. So if we look at the verbs here, drive and scour. So this is about, if you drive something, it means you push it forward. This implies something forceful. If you scour the globe, it means you're searching for something relentlessly. You will not give up. And if you're cutting costs and making things at breakneck speed, the implication of the word breakneck is that people will die. If you break your neck, you will be hurt, and you could die. So this is this idea that this causes this sort of drive for ever cheaper clothes, leading companies to scour the globe, can only end in pain. Okay, so she brings it back to a sense of logic by painting the sort of bigger picture of the Bangladeshi suppliers for Target, Big W, Cotton On, again, putting it back in an Australian context. She also lets us know that these companies refuse to release copies of audit reports to the ABC 7:30 report. This in itself implies guilt. The fact that they do not want to expose themselves, she's suggesting that they're guilty of something. In the yellow there, such companies says for Oxfam's Daisy Gardner. Again, she's aligning her values with those of the human rights movement, of bettering the lives of those less fortunate, therefore giving her quite a grounded moral stance. This idea that they're operating behind a veil of secrecy, that quote is quite significant as well. You need to consider the implications of the language there. Again, the yellow paragraph, so this is the fourth column over the page, is all about a sort of an alignment of values. She talks about Oxfam. So this is a reputable humanitarian effort, non-profit company, and then we also have the sort of use of Pope Francis and his comparison to slavery of what goes on in Bangladeshi factories as also qualifying her position that this is just not right. By aligning herself with Pope Francis and Oxfam, she's appealing to us not only on an ethical level but on a religious level as well, saying that, you know, a leader like this, if a leader like this can see this in this way, then why can't we? This blue paragraph here you should consider as an appeal to economic values, economic sensibilities through comparison and giving it context. And as we move through, we come back to this idea of, you know, ethical eating, ethical fashion, ethical clothing, and the fact that Australia made producers need to be certified, and that there are these options in Australia, and that I think she's also raising the question here of why aren't we pursuing more of this sort of manufacturing. She finishes on quite an evocative note by using language that is geared towards questioning our deepest sense of humanity. So by asking the questions, will we forget Rana Plaza in a few weeks as we stock up our winter wardrobes? You know, she's really asking the reader to consider their consumption of these cheaper brands in light of the deaths of so many. And then the last question, or will we keep scrutinising fashion's dark heart? She's imploring the audience to do the second, to act on the second question, to scrutinise fashion's dark heart. Obviously, the implications of the word dark heart are really strong as well.